Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm back with another video. It is February 4th, 2025, and I want to talk about what I see as a shift and confusion within the dominant narrative that is going on right now. So I'm kind of inspired, actually, by a video that Garland Nixon, who's a very interesting commentator, has been putting forth, and that is that the the people who have been running the show for all these years, you could call them the neocons, you can call them the deep state, whatever you want to call them, have kind of realized that they've reached their limit, and they're not. It may be that the neocons themselves, but it also may be factions within the really ruling power structure of the United States are realizing that they basically are not going to win the war the way they thought they were going to win it. That is by having full spectrum dominance of the entire planet. So they're essentially retrenching and rethinking what their strategy is going to be. So that's basically the point of this video. Now, one of the points that Nixon points out is that the election itself, resulted in Donald Trump winning the election, and and Kamala Harris. He raises the very legitimate question: why was Kamala Harris even put forth as a candidate? Because she's one of the weakest candidates that the Democratic Party could possibly have put forward. It's as if they almost wanted to lose the election. Was that what the plan was? And maybe they were saying, you know what, we're going to give up and we're just going to hand it over to Trump and see if he can fix this mess. So that may be what the actual agenda is. Now, one of the signature symptoms of this shift is that there's real confusion within the Trump camp about what is actually going on and what they should do about Russia and the Ukraine war specifically. So let's talk about that. First of all, Trump has this idea that he's a master deal maker and he can make anybody do whatever he wants, essentially. And so he has this idea of Russia that I think the entire Western elite actually has this psychological tendency to objectify Russia as some kind of entity. It's like this piece on a chessboard that they can just move around and they can do whatever they want to it. And they don't really consider the possibility that Russia has any agency, that Russia has a mind of its own and it can do things that it wants to do, and the U.S. has very little control over it. So in the case where Trump said a number of things, one of which was that he was going to end the war in Ukraine. He says, I don't want this war in Ukraine. I'm going to end it before I even come into office. And then just before he came into office, he said, I'm going to end this in one day. And then there was a kind of a time clock, counting down. Well, you've got 12 more hours to solve the problem, 12 more hours to solve the problem. And lo and behold, the day goes by and the problem still isn't solved. And then he says, well, maybe it'll be 3 months, 100 days, maybe it'll be 6 months. And he gets these people, like this Doug, what's his name? Keith Kellogg's cornflake. He's going to send him over to Russia, and he thinks that this general is going to intimidate the Russians to come up with some compromise. And the Russians are in no mood to compromise because they've been lied to so many times that they just said, the hell with it. We're just going to do what we're going to do. So there's that. Now, one of the other issues that came up, and this is where it gets kind of confusing, is the fact that even though Trump wants to maintain control of everything and he's the master of the deal, he is doing things that are undermining Ukraine. So recently he made the decision to cut off all foreign aid for 90 days while there's an audit going on. And the the this cutoff applies to this agency called USAID. And I've known for years that USAID is basically a kind of an arm of the CIA. It's not fully CIA, but there's a lot of CIA operatives within it. It's my understanding. So I think they distribute humanitarian aid, and they do humanitarian programs, and they're supposed to be the good guy face of the United States. It's U.S. aid. We're aiding people, but in fact, they've been the main agents of regime change in many countries. So any country that thinks that U.S. aid is going to do them any good, they probably figured out by now that that's just not the case. But so the weird thing is that Trump recently, by defunding or by temporarily defunding the USAID, the practical effect was that he was cutting off the funding to all of the publicly owned news broadcasting agencies of Ukraine. And why is that important? Well, it's important because following the Revolution of Dignity, which was a coup by the United States, funded by the USAID, they brought in a regime they overthrew a democratically elected government. And the most recent president, President Zelensky, who was elected on the basis of wanting to have peace with Russia, he broke his promises about all of that, and basically did pretty much whatever the West wanted him to do, which was to foment the war. He also, but it's much worse than that, because he also got rid of his political opposition, who could possibly have opposed any of these policies. And he also got rid of all the independent media. So if you get rid of your opposition in politics and you get rid of the opposition media, who's left? You've got the state-controlled media. And where does the state-controlled media get its money? Well, Ukraine isn't in a position to pay anybody any money. They're broke. So all the money that comes in is from the United States. So the USAID was funding all of the public broadcasting systems in Ukraine. And now they're all whining because they don't have any money. And so the Ukrainian whole propaganda apparatus is completely crippled because there's nobody to pay these people. So it remains to be seen what's going to happen when the news outlets stop publishing, and all the Ukrainian people know is what they hear from their Telegram channels, that they're getting their ass kicked by the Russians. And the other interesting thing recently was this guy who's the head of the Ukrainian intelligence service, Budanov, was quoted as saying that he felt that Ukraine was in such dire straits that it's probably going to disappear within the next few months. That clip has not actually appeared. It's a case of somebody said that he said that Ukraine was going to disappear. So you can't be sure that he said it, but there's a pretty strong likelihood that he actually did. And the facts on the ground are basically that's the case. So that's the situation with USAID. It looks like the possibility that Trump is actually going to do the right thing as far as Ukraine is concerned. And the way to end the Ukraine war is simply to cut off the money. And the Ukraine government, which is completely dependent on the United States, their military, everything. If the way the U.S. ended the war in Afghanistan was to leave, and the way to end the Ukraine war is for the U.S. to leave, and the way the U.S. ended the Vietnam War was to leave. That is the way the war will end. And all the talk that Trump and his aides and his spokespeople say about coming to some resolution or some compromise or some negotiation, this is not realistic thinking. These people are all grasping at straws. The whole Ukraine project that was based on lies, it was based on subversion of a country, based on a genetic hatred of Russia, trying to break it apart in order to get control of its resources and take revenge for President Putin's dragging the country out of the abyss which the West clearly wanted it to go into. All of that has failed. So Trump, it appears that Trump is giving indications that he's willing to wash his hands of the whole thing. So we'll have to see, because on the one hand, he's just one person. On the other hand, we don't really know what the actual agenda is. And on the third hand, who are the people who are actually making the decision in this country? It could be that as some people have pointed out, Trump can make nice with the Russians. He says, I want to do the Russians a favor by bailing out their failing economy, which isn't failing. And he also, one of the other things he did recently was he went to a hockey game, and there's a famous Russian goalie for one of the hockey teams, and he actually went over to this guy and shook his hand as if to say, "Yeah, I like you Russians." So some commentators say, see, that's an indication that Russia really, that Trump really wants to be friends with Russia again, and he wants to, bury the hatchet. And I say, Trump is a sociopath. He has no moral anchor at all. He says anything that fits his objective in a specific moment to get whatever he thinks he wants at that moment, and you have no idea what he'll do in the next moment. So I think people need to just take those kinds of demonstrations with a grain of salt. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is this idea that there's a negotiation to be done with Russia is it's highly, highly unlikely. I recently saw an article by one of the chief, you could say, ideologists of modern Russia named Sergei Kagaganov. And basically what he said is that the only solution to this problem is for the West to fully give up its imperialistic ambitions. And Russia is just going to have to teach them that lesson. One of the questions that came up in earlier discussions was when John F. Kennedy was talking about great power relations. He said that it's very important not to humiliate a country and not to put it into a situation where it was going to be humiliated, especially if it has nuclear weapons, because they may use the nuclear weapons to avoid being humiliated. But the fact that the West simply refuses to give up its imperial ambitions makes it probable that Russia is simply going to have to do what it said it was going to do in the very beginning. In February 2022, Putin and the security the security agency of Russia said that they had two objectives in Ukraine. One was to demilitarize Ukraine. After the coup in 2014, Ukraine was basically armed and trained and funded by the West as a battering ram against Russia. And Russia has done a very good job since 2022 of dismantling and demilitarizing Ukraine as a military power. It was one of the most powerful countries. It's not a NATO member, but if it had been a NATO member, it would have been one of the most powerful armies. Had a military arm, had something like 500,000 soldiers, and it was well equipped with not only Soviet era weapons but also NATO weapons. And Russia has systematically destroyed a large amount of that, most of it, and also it's destroyed many of the soldiers, especially some of the most zealous and most fanatical soldiers in the Ukrainian military who pose the greatest threat to Russia. Now they're basically scrounging the streets looking for unwilling candidates to be in the military who are going to be cannon fodder. And these people either die quickly or they desert quickly. So the Ukraine military is in the process of falling apart. So that's demilitarization. The second issue is the more deeper issue, which is that when during World War II, you had a faction within Ukraine. It was then the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. It was one of the constituent republics of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. There was a faction within that group of people who were allied with the Nazis. They have a very toxic nationalistic idea of Ukrainian supremacy. They've written histories which are absurd, where Ukraine was the original language of the world. Some I don't remember exactly what these ideas are, but they're completely ludicrous ideas. Maybe Ukraine dug the Black Sea. These very, very silly ideas, and they want, because they're trying to build up the Ukrainian the youth of Ukraine to believe all these myths about what Ukraine actually is. So that was, and one of the main components of it is extreme Russophobia. They just hate everything Russian. But and these people were nurtured by the United States following World War II. As I've pointed out to a recent acquaintance of mine, you can go to CIA documents where they say, yeah, well, that guy Stefan Bandera, he's one of those Ukrainian nationalists, and yeah, he's a terrorist and he's committed atrocities, but he's still our guy, so we should back him up anyway. And so the Russians are saying, no, we're not going to allow that. In fact, a Russian agent, a Soviet agent, did kill this guy, Stefan Bandera, I think in 1953 or 1955, and the whole structure of that extremist Ukrainian nationalist movement was rooted out by the Soviets in the early 1950s, and they were either killed or put behind bars, or they fled to Canada or the United States or other countries. Well, during that period of time, they kind of laid low. And then when the Soviet Union ended in 1991, they had a resurgence of this Ukrainian nationalism. And with the advent of democracy and independence from the Soviet Union, these nationalistic organizations gained a tremendous amount of power. And by 2014, they actually took over the government. And they've been the ones who've been running policy. It's not the Ukrainian people are crazy about them. They don't really, many of them don't ascribe to their ideas, but especially the older generation. But the younger generation just doesn't know any better. So many of them, believed in what they were told. And that has had catastrophic consequences for Ukraine. So Russia is basically putting an end to all that. And one of the main goals that it has, besides demilitarization, is denazification. And whether the United States is willing to allow that to happen, they may not really have any choice, because if Russia really does dominate on the battlefield, there's no reason for Russia to negotiate. So we hear a lot of talk, both in the establishment community, about negotiating an end to this terrible war, or you hear from even well-meaning commentators who are in the alternative media saying, yes, we really need to bring this war to an end. We need to have a negotiated settlement. And as far as many of the Russians are concerned, such as this fellow Kaganinov that I mentioned, and the Russian leadership class itself is saying, we've been lied to so many times. We've negotiated, we've tried to negotiate, the negotiations have failed, or when we've actually negotiated treaties, they break out of the treaties, they break their agreements, and so we're just going to have to do what we have to do. So that is the direction where things are heading. And my concern now is that, in terms of the larger geopolitical implications, is that as the United States has lost its grip, the original plan was for the United States and England to get control of the Asian landmass. This was called the Mackinder Doctrine, where a British historian and geographer, said that he who controls the Asian landmass controls the world. And so that has been the geopolitical goal of the West for all this time. But of course, the victim countries of that ideology, China, India, Iran, and many of the other countries in Asia, have gradually, got back their power, and have been gradually kicking out the Europeans and the Americans from that Asian landmass, as well as kicking them out of Africa and to a certain degree out of Latin America. So what we're seeing here with Trump's idea of making Greenland part of the United States, or making Canada part of the United States, or even invading Mexico, or taking over Panama, these are all what I consider to be a complete retrenchment. It's like an acknowledgement we've lost the war for control of the world, and so we're going to retrench and we're going to control the Western Hemisphere. That, I think, is the Trump plan, and we'll just have to see how that all plays out. But that's my sense of it. The corollary to this, though, which is that one would hope that if the United States really does, let's say, take its military bases, it has 700 or 800 military bases all over the world. If they take out those military bases, then there's a lot of money that would be freed up that could be used to, rebuild U.S. infrastructure, create a better educational system, do all the things that would really, build housing for homeless people. There's a lot of work that really needs to be done that isn't being done because all the money is going mainly into regime change, into USAID and the military-industrial complex. So if they can, if the U.S. government were willing to acknowledge the fact that that's basically been the wrong approach, if you want to have a strong country, to base it on domination of the external world, it's a recipe for failure. And if they're willing to redirect the money to go into building up the country from the inside, improving education, improving healthcare, all the things that the civilian population needs, then you have a chance for a revival. But my sense of it is that the people, as George Carlin, again, that great comedian and prophet, said, the real owners don't want that. They want obedient workers who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork, and just dumb enough to not realize how badly they've been screwed for the last 30 to 50 years. And whether the U.S. population can really wake up to see that is the question. It's very hard to say how that will all pan out. I have relatives who live in Southern California. Their house survived. It's the only house in the neighborhood that actually did make it through that terrible fire in Pacific Palisades. But there's rumors that BlackRock will go into that neighborhood and buy out all the homeowners there for pennies on the dollar, and then rebuild it with high-rise apartment buildings, which are far more profitable. And this will be the Wall Street solution to the problem of crumbling infrastructure. So it's very uncertain where all this is going, and we'll just have to wait and see, I think. Well, I don't want to say completely wait and see. We have to. The reason why I'm making these videos actually is because I want to alert everybody to the fact that these are the kinds of things that are going on, and we have to figure out a way to organize ourselves to take our country back. So again, if you would like to help me spread the word, I have these information billboard T-shirts, which you can go to different websites, a couple of different websites, and buy a T-shirt, wear the T-shirt. I don't make much money off of it, but it's really just a way for the ideas that I'm trying to create on this channel how to spread them. So that's what I have to say today, and wish you all the best, and I'll see you in the next video.